Amber Rainey and I live with sensory processing disorder. Sometimes my condition makes me feel isolated from other people, but sometimes I find unexpected connections. My guest today is Brianne DeMarco, and like her, I too sometimes have problems with focus. There are times when my sensory processing disorder is so overwhelming that I can't focus on what I'm supposed to be focusing on. I get distracted by some clicking noise that no one else can hear. And I mean, it is a valid clicking noise. It's just, to me, it sounds 5,000 decibels to where somebody else has to stop and actually listen to hear it. I could get distracted by a tag in my clothing to where it's so scratchy and so itchy to me that I just cannot focus on whatever I'm doing, be it teaching my son his math or, you know, supposedly acting on a set or anything like that. You know, the heat and the cold affect me really heavily. So if I'm super cold, it's really hard for me to think about anything except for the shaking and trying to avoid shaking, and I can't focus on talking to somebody or walking down a street. It is really so overwhelming that my brain just refuses to focus on the thing I want it to focus on and focuses on the sensory input that it's receiving. But Brianne doesn't live with sensory processing disorder. She lives with clinical anxiety. Thank you for being here, Brianne.
Of course, thank you for having me.
Can you describe clinical anxiety in your own words?
To me, clinical anxiety is thinking about things and worrying about things, and it gets in the way of your life. It's not just because everybody has worries, but it's feeling like something is wrong all day, every day, for absolutely no reason, and obsessing over things more than you should, to where it's getting in the trouble of like sleeping, it's getting in the trouble of like getting your work done, your day-to-day, just kind of in the way of life.
How do you feel this affects you in society?
I think it affects me in a lot of ways that I think people aren't aware of. Like, it can be really hard for me to do something that seems simple. Like if someone sends me a text message, I've had a lot of friends in the past be like, you never answer your texts. And it's not that I don't see them, it's not that I don't care about that person. It's just that sometimes the idea of like opening up a message and actually dealing with it seems terrifying. And there's not a lot of logic behind it, and that's what I found with anxiety, is that logic is not really a factor. The things that I worry about, some of them are normal, which is not a word that I like, but some of them are the same types of things that everyone worries about. You know, you worry about your health, you worry about your kids, you worry about, you know, are you doing the right thing? You know, your car starts making a funny noise, you know, and it's like, those are like regular worries. But then there's stuff that just makes absolutely zero sense. And for me, I found that getting back to people can be really difficult. And that definitely affects me. That can affect me in business. That can affect me in like personal relationships. And especially like when I was an older teen or like a younger 20-something, I had a lot of friends that would get really irritated with me. And I wasn't diagnosed with anxiety at that point. And I'm just like, oh, I meant to, I just didn't. And I didn't know why I didn't. I would just kind of ignore it and avoid it.
What would you like people to know about anxiety?
I think that it's different for everyone. I think that's kind of huge, because I think especially with anything to do with mental health, people think, you know, oh, it's this diagnosis, so that means X. And it can mean all sorts of things. For me, social anxiety, which is kind of a part of my anxiety, but not all of it. For me, social anxiety can mean one thing, but for someone else it means something else. For me, it means that if I have to talk to someone who I don't know, that's a huge, like, I'm going to be anxious about that at least up until that point that day. I may be anxious about it the night before. It may stop me from being able to get good sleep. it depends on like how much time I have. Sometimes I can ignore it until I'm like, oh, I have to do that. But at the same time, like if I'm in a big crowd, I'm fine. Because I feel like no one's paying attention to me. And so to me, I'm like, I'm just no one, I'm just walking through and it's no big deal. Whereas I know a lot of people have a huge issue with crowds and can't handle them at all. For me, also, like placing an order at a restaurant or a fast food place, like I rehearse it in my mind. Like I have to think about it. And I didn't notice until recently that, probably like over the last few years, that a lot of people, they figure out what they want at a restaurant and then they put the menu away. And like I can't do that. I have to have it right there, and I have to have it like open to what I'm gonna order so that I can say, okay, it's that, and I can look at it, look at the waiter, look at that and be like, I like this. And I think I was about 17 before I started ordering for myself. And again, it's the kind of thing where it's like, I think I've had anxiety for a long time, and it wasn't until last year that I was actually diagnosed with an anxiety disorder. But yeah, I think that would be it. Just that it's different things for different people. Different people are gonna have issues with different situations.
Do you feel like your upbringing and, maybe being a woman and other things is what kept you from being diagnosed until recently, or not being able to talk about it?
Yeah, I think in general we need to talk to kids and teens about mental health more. I think especially when I was a teenager, which I feel like is when my mental health was the worst. I was also dealing with a lot of depression at that point, which I don't deal with as much now. If no one tells you what something is, then you just assume that that's what everyone's experiencing. So I would have a lot of insomnia. My mom would be like, just go to bed, which is fair, because a lot of kids are like, they just, they have like the fear of missing out. They want to be up, they want to see, oh, the parents are watching TV, I want to join in. But I couldn't sleep because I was laying in bed thinking about decisions I had made and just getting stuck in, and not recent decisions, not something that actually had any effect on my life at that point at all. And I would just be thinking about it, and did I make the right decision? And I disappointed this person, and why did I do that? And I shouldn't have done that. And I would be up until, 2 hours before I was supposed to get up for school. And people didn't really talk about mental health as much as they do now, which I'm glad that we are talking about it now. So I didn't know that I wasn't doing something that everybody else wasn't doing. And I think that's a big part of it. So I think if we can talk to kids, then they know, okay, I'm doing this, so this is going on. I feel like there's a lot of checking in, making sure like they have their vaccines and, they have a good BMI and they're exercising and eating right and not having too much screen time. But I don't feel like, especially, pediatricians, like I don't feel like they check in enough on like the mental health part.
So there's a big stigma around having to talk to a therapist, and I know that step can be very difficult. How do you feel talking to a therapist or talking to someone helps the condition, or how do you feel get past that hesitation to talk to somebody?
It's really hard, and I think I found, especially, I was so at the beginning of 2018 last year, I was kind of looking at, it's that kind of new year check-in with yourself, like, what do I want to change, what do I want to make better? And I try not to do those crazy resolutions that, everybody gets a gym membership and goes once, and then, they pay through the end of the year and they never go again. But I had always thought, because I grew up with some family members who had mental health stuff going on. And to me, I'm fine if people are neurologically different, if they're not neurotypical, I'm like, that's cool, you do you. For me, it was always like, is it getting in the way of me living? Because I don't need everybody to be exactly the same. And I don't need me to be exactly the same as everyone. But I came to the point at the beginning of last year where I was like, okay, this is getting in the way. This is taking up a lot of my time. This is stopping me from, I have a lot of anxiety about the holidays, and I don't know why, I just do. And it would stop me from calling my grandma. It would stop me from going and seeing my parents on Christmas. And I didn't like that, and I couldn't explain it to them. And so it was like a lot of hurt feelings. And, you know, that's just one example, but all of these things, I'm like, okay, this is getting in the way. This is negatively affecting my life. So I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go to my primary. And at that point, I need to find a primary because they keep leaving. I need to, find a primary, get an appointment, talk to them, let them know, hey, I'm having these problems, where should we go from here? And it took me until August to do that. So it took me 8 months of like thinking about it, knowing I needed to do it, and then not doing it. And I saw my primary the first time and did not bring it up. And then I saw her a second time and I did not bring it up.
So the disorder is preventing you from
Yeah. So what I ran into is that my anxiety was stopping me from getting help with my anxiety. And the day that I finally said something, I didn't really even take any action that day. I just kind of brought it up. And she had mentioned medication, and I was like, oh, I'm just not sure, and then the next time I came in and I'm like, okay, so last time you said, I'm struggling with anxiety, this is how it's affecting me. This time you're gonna say, I'm interested in trying medication. Because for me it wasn't just the worrying, it wasn't just things seeming scarier than they should be in different, social aspects and personal aspects. It was also like having a feeling of low-level anxiety all the time. And that gets really exhausting because you just feel like something's wrong and nothing's wrong. And you're just trying to work or go for a run or watch YouTube or, enjoy time with family or whatever it is. And you just feel like something's wrong the whole time, like you forgot something. So it's really hard. And in terms of like specifically a therapist, I am not yet at that point. I think I want to get there, but I feel like I have to kind of make these baby steps like I did with my doctor to get myself to actually get to that point.
How do you feel like it affects your relationships? Do you feel like you can't relax in your relationship, or do you feel like, are you constantly worried?
I worry about everything. I am constantly telling myself, because I really try to keep a good mindset about like, you can be feeling something and have an emotion of something, but that doesn't necessarily make it true. It's how you're feeling, and that's valid. Anything that someone's feeling is a valid feeling for them, because that's what they're experiencing. But just because my wife is having a bad day doesn't mean that I did something wrong. And that's where I always jump to, is like, oh, this person seems tense, what did I do wrong? And what can I fix? And I have a little mantra of like, everything's not about you. And it's not, I'm not trying to say that it is about me, but that's how I internalize stuff, is I think, oh, I've done something wrong. What can I do? What can I fix? What have I messed up? And often it's just people have bad days. Or things don't go as planned, and that's totally fine. But it's really, for me, it's weighing my emotions versus what I can perceive as like real reality.
So do you feel like you're more sensitive when someone says something that could have multiple connotations?
Oh yeah.
You take it the wrong way. Usually, yeah. You take it to the extreme with the person,
And I'll think about it a lot.
So,
and that's where I get myself into trouble, is I can't, especially with like personal interactions, I have trouble just having an interaction and letting it go. I like to think about like, did I talk too much? Did I talk too little? Was I being appropriate? Was I talking about like appropriate things? Was someone completely bored the whole time? Am I talking about myself too much? And I felt like that for, I don't know, forever.
So do you have suggestions for how, maybe not strangers, but how people that know you can help maybe alleviate some of the anxiety? Or so say someone wants to give you feedback, and it's generally positive feedback, but they don't want to like send you into the spiral of self-doubt. Do you have any suggestions for that?
I don't know that I do. I think it's hard because I feel like it's so much in my own head. That's a hard one. That's a good question. I think just being clear about stuff, like when people leave things vague, I think that's when there's room for like all sorts of like anxiety to pop up. Yeah, I think just, you know, being specific about whatever it is, that helps a lot. And I've also found for myself, I have made myself ask more questions. So instead of me, you know, reading someone's message or listening to what someone's saying and making assumptions, that gets me into a ton of trouble. So I'll ask questions, and sometimes like I had an experience where I was looking at the message and I'm like, I think they're saying X. And what X was very upsetting. And I just let myself have time with it. And then about 5 minutes later, I wrote back, "Are you saying?" And then I filled in what I thought it was. And they went, no, not at all. And I think that's helpful for me. But that's something that I feel like someone has to do on their own, is ask questions and not make assumptions.
So do you have suggestions of things that work for you besides not making assumptions? Like, I know you have to like jump in and say, stop, let's think about this for a minute. But are there any other things that work to help you when you have insomnia, to help your brain shut down? Or
yeah, I think everybody has things that can help them. For me, being left alone with my own thoughts sometimes can be a really bad idea, which is not all the time, certainly, but if I notice that that's where I'm going, I try to redirect. So if I'm laying in bed and I start like really obsessing over something that's happening the next day, then I stop and say, you know what? When you made this plan for whatever it was, when you made this plan, it was not a big deal. And you're making it into a big deal. So maybe chill out. And then I try to give my brain something else to focus on. So I'll often, if I'm having trouble sleeping, I'll put on a TV show on my phone and just kind of try to zone out to that. And I'll usually fall asleep with it still playing in a headphone, but you know, my phone's plugged in, so whatever. But that helps. If I'm out like going for a walk and I find that I'm doing the same thing, like I'm thinking about something and I'm overthinking it and I'm getting myself worked up about whatever it is, you know, I'll listen to music and I'll focus on that, or a podcast, or just to give my brain a chance to shut up for a moment.
do you find that you really only have the one voice, or do you find that your brain's going in 5 million directions and that sometimes you just need to refocus?
Kind of both. I think it just depends on the time. Sometimes I feel like I'm all over and I'm worrying about everything, and sometimes it's like I'll focus in on one thing. It just depends on the day, I think.
So do you think that when it's the one thing, it's something that's more overwhelming to you, or is it more overwhelming to worry about everything?
It's usually, if it's one thing, it's situational. It's something that is coming up. Like if I know that the next day we have people coming over that I haven't met, and I'll focus on that. When it's everything, I think it's because there's not something situational. It's just like the general, like, oh, what about this and that thing I did in high school, and why did I say this to that person when I was 16? Which there's no reason to think about, because it's, you know, it's in the past.
Do you feel like the anxiety is it's a constant, or do you feel like it's more when you stop and have time to think about it, or just like this level, this constant level of...
It's kind yeah, I mean, again, it's kind of both. I've found, so I talked to my doctor about starting medication, and I did, and I started Zoloft, and I found that that's been really helpful with the low-level anxiety. So if there's not something, either I'm obsessing about some thing that's happening the next day or the next hour or whatever it is. If there's not that, and I'm just doing my day-to-day, it's just doing my day-to-day. And that's been really, really, really nice. Because again, it can be exhausting to be feeling like something's wrong all the time. There's nothing wrong. But definitely like when I have time to just think on things, sometimes my brain does like to go through the rabbit hole of let's worry about things that we did wrong that are completely irrelevant. And it's just figuring out, me being aware of like when that starts so I can kind of stop it at that point rather than letting it go down that rabbit hole.
Thank you very much for coming today.
Oh, you're welcome. I was glad to.
Thank you. Thank you for watching Connection. I hope that these conversations show everyone that no matter what we face, no matter what differences we have, we can find common ground. Ultimately, we're all connected.